Of Shabbos, everybody. We'll begin with Birchas Kohanim. Vayadaber Yinoy Al Moshe Leimer Daber Laram V'Banav Leimer Kei Sebaruchos B'nei Yisrael Amar Lahem Yivarech Echad Yinoy V'Yishmerecha Yoyer Adinoi Panav Eilecha V'Chuneka Yis Adinoi Panav Eilecha V'Yasem Lacha Shalom V'Samoi Shemiah B'nei Yisrael B'Ani Avorachem. Also, I'd like to once again invite everyone. Our shul is back indoors. Without the social distancing, everyone is welcome to join us. The shul has been totally remodeled. It's a beautiful shul. We'd love to have all of you participate and join us. Tomorrow morning, davening is at 10 o'clock, and everyone is treated to a sit-down lunch following davening. This week, we're going to read two portions, the portion of Matos and the portion of Maseh. It's that second of this week's double portion that I'd like to focus on. The very word Maseh means journeys. And it begins, and these are the journeys of the children of Israel. Eila Maseh b'nei Yisrael. And the Torah goes on to account for the 42 journeys of the Jewish people from the day they left Egypt until they arrive at the border of Israel. 42 encampments. Some of these encampments, by the way, were just for hours, and some were for dozens of years. And the obvious question is, why are the journeys so important? Why does the Torah need to literally list every one of the 42 encampments? Each one is listed by name. You know, when you get on a flight from New York and it's a stopover in St. Louis, you're going from New York to Los Angeles, and you happen to stop off in St. Louis. When you land in Los Angeles, you don't say, I came from St. Louis. You say, I came from New York. The fact that the plane stopped off somewhere is not really significant to the journey. You are doing a cross-country trip, New York, Los Angeles, New York, and whether they stop off in Houston or St. Louis or Denver, Colorado, there's really very little meaning to it. Who cares where you stopped off? That wasn't your destination, and that wasn't where you departed from. The Jewish people traveled from Egypt to the Promised Land. And they got a little farblunged. They got a little bit lost, and it took 40 years, and they made some stops along the way. The departure, Egypt, is important information. The destination, Israel, is important information. That they wandered for 40 years, important information. But where they actually stopped off and the name of the place where they stopped off 42 different times, why is this so important that the Torah needs to list each and every single one of them? You see, unless an event took place in our stopover in St. Louis that made the stopover significant, then you would talk about St. Louis. If something happened there. But even then, it's not the purpose of my journey. It's not my destination. Something strange happened to me on the way to New York or on the way to Los Angeles. But the focus is still on my final destination. What becomes clear when you read the portion of Maseh is that, true, the final destination is the Promised Land, but the journeys themselves, the 40 years of travel, was not just for the sake of the arrival at the final terminal, but in and of themselves, they were destinations. They had purpose, they had meaning, they had mission. As the verse states, Al Pi Hashem, each stop, each go, even when it appeared to be a simple pit stop, was Al Pi Hashem, was by the mouth of God, had a godly purpose, a godly mission, a destination that stands alone as well. And that's why the names of each journey is critical, for the names of themselves hint as to what was accomplished there, what was learned, what was gained at each stop along the way. An example, one of the stops was called Kivrot Hatava. Now, the translation of those words, Kivrot Hatava, Kivrot is from the word kever, a burial. Hatava means of desire. It was the place that was called the burial of desire. Well, that's telling us what happened there. They learned how to deal with a seemingly uncontrollable desire, and they grew from the experience that took place there. Each of the destinations of the 42 travels of the Jewish people had a purpose. There was a growth for the Jewish people that took place there. There was an experience. Each stop was another part of the picture, a part of the picture without which the entire journey was not complete. The journey would be lacking. Each stop was another color, another dimension, another character. And when we combine all of these destinations and we look at them as a whole, Eila Maaseh B'nai Yisrael, then we see these combined together is the beautiful picture of the Jewish people's journey, the tapestry of Jewish history that encompasses all of that which we, the Jewish people, represent. Every part of the picture is connected in some way. Every part matches, it blends with the rest of the picture. You may not see it at first, but Eila Maaseh, when we have all 42 journeys and now we can look at them collectively, we begin to understand the journey. Each stop along the way is indeed a destination for itself, but at the same time is also part of the greater journey, the journey to the promised land. Now let's take that message and apply it to ourselves in our own lives. Our lives are made up of a series of journeys. It's not just born in New York, died in Los Angeles, that's the story. There are many stops along the way, and each stop is a destination for itself. You're here because you are meant to be here, al pi Hashem, by the mouth of God. And each part of our journey in life has a mission, a role that we must play, a job that we must do, something that we must accomplish for our personal mission in life. If not, we wouldn't be where we are. Every stop along the way of our lives had purpose, had meaning, and was part of the itinerary that God planned for our soul and our body to have in this experience of life. And they were not insignificant, and they were not minor. It's a chapter in our book, a chapter without which the book loses its meaning. It's not a stopover in St. Louis. It's a destination for itself. And yet each part of our picture, the picture of our life, should have this common thread, al pi Hashem, that we're here to do God's work. In whichever conditions we find ourselves, in whichever city we find ourselves, whatever task, whatever job we find ourselves in, we're here to fulfill a godly mission. When Shai Agnon received the Nobel Prize for Literature, he was interviewed and he was asked his birthplace. And he said, Jerusalem. So one of the reporters said, excuse me, Mr. Agnon, it's a fact. We all know that you were born in Galicia. What do you mean Jerusalem? So he said, I was born in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. One of my stops in life was in Galicia. That's the way we have to view ourselves. We have stops along the way. And we have to remember this at all times, as it says in Ethics of Our Fathers. Da me ayin boso la'on ata holich. Know from where you come and know to where you're going and to whom you must give an accounting of all of your accomplishments. When the 12 spies went into the land of Israel, 10 came back with a bad report. They were cowards, they were weak, they were scared. And their weakness, unfortunately, inspired a mass weakness from the Jewish people. But 2 of the 12 spies, they were not afraid. And they attempted, unsuccessfully, but the Torah records their attempt, and they were greatly rewarded for it. They attempted to persuade the masses not to listen to the 10 others, but to be strong. Chazak, chazak. Be strong. And although they weren't successful, the Torah tells us of their bravery for all eternity. And they both merited to enter into the promised land. Who were these 2 brave individuals? Their names were Kalev and Yehoshua, Joshua. Now, regarding Joshua, we can understand where his courage came from. He was a student of Moses. In fact, Moses blessed him before he left and added the letter Yud to his name, Yud representing God's name. His name was Hosea, and Moses changes his name Yehoshua, that God should give you strength. So someone that's a student of Moses and stays with Moses all the time and studies with Moses all the time and receives a special blessing from Moses, we can understand why he had the strength and the courage to stand up. But what about Kalev? Where did he get the strength from? So we're taught that when Caleb entered in as one of the spies into the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, before he went about his duty, doing his spy work, scouting the land, it says he made a detour. Where did he go? He wanted to go to the city of Hebron. And specifically in Hebron, he wanted to go to the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the burial of the patriarchs. He wanted to pray at the gravesite of the patriarchs and matriarchs. Caleb understood mission. He understood that each part of the mission is connected to the other. He was not an escaped slave from Egypt wandering in the wilderness looking for a home. No, he was a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, who was promised this land. And he is here as a member of a chosen people to whom God revealed himself at Sinai. He understood that that was more important than anything else, to connect himself to the patriarchs and matriarchs. And this gave him strength, and this gave him courage. We have to always ask ourselves, like Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers asks us, do you know who you are? Do you know who you come from? Do you know from where you come? And do you know to where you're going? For if you do, then you must know how important your destination of today must be, that today matters. And we have to make the best of it, and we have to make it count. I want to conclude with a story. It's a story I've shared many years ago. It's a little personal story because it has to do with a very close friend of my father's of blessed memory. My father grew up in the city of Melnick, Poland, and he had a very close friend from childhood whose name was Rabbi Bukit of blessed memory. And Rabbi Bukit was the patriarch of a beautiful family. Many of his children and his grandchildren, and perhaps now his great-grandchildren, now serve as Chabad emissaries all over the world. Rabbi Bukit was a Rebbe in yeshiva throughout the year, and for the summertime he would go to the Catskills in New York, where he would teach in a summer yeshiva program. In the summer of 1970, for whatever reason, the learning program in the Catskills was canceled. So his daughter, who, along with her husband of blessed memory, Rabbi Yerachmiel Stillman, they lived in Westwood, California. They worked in the Chabad house in Westwood. And they invite their father, look, if you're not going to be in the Catskills this summer, why stay in Flatbush and East Flatbush? Come out to Southern California. You'll have a good time. Bring the family. So Rabbi Bukit was not so comfortable with this idea. Vacations was not something he did. He would teach all year. He would teach during the summer. But now there was really nothing for him to do during the summer. And his daughter was making an interesting invitation to visit them in Southern California, to bring the family, to bring all the children. In those days, it wasn't traveling by plane. They were considering traveling by train, which would take an entire week. But the Stillmans were persistent, and Rabbi Bukit decided that he would write a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and ask the Rebbe if he should accept them on this invitation. No yeshiva program this summer. My daughter wants us to go to California. I don't know. I'm not sure. Should I go? And the Rebbe responds, Kedai loy. It's a good idea. You should go. It's a worthwhile idea. You should go, and gave him a blessing on the trip. Okay, now the Rebbe is sending him. He's on a mission. So the entire Bukit clan boards a train on their way from East Flatbush, New York to Los Angeles to spend time in Westwood, California. The first Shabbos that they're there, the Stillmans explain that they run a Friday night dinner at the Chabad house in Westwood for college students. And they're trying to explain to their white-bearded father that it may not be exactly like his shul in Brooklyn. It's a little bit different. The people look a little different than the Jews of East Flatbush that come to your shul. There's something here called a hippie. There's different types of dress. And Rabbi Bukit gets it, and he says, look, you don't have to worry about me. No problem. I appreciate the work that you're doing. You're bringing everybody in. You don't have to worry about it. Don't be embarrassed. That Friday night, after the evening services, it was time for the meal. Rabbi Bukit was invited to sit at the head table with all of the rabbis, and he says, no, I want to be in the middle of the crowd, together with all the college kids. I love their pounding on the table and their singing and their spirit. That's where I want to be. And he insisted, and as much as they said, no, please sit at the head table, no, I'm staying here with the guys. During the meal, he's rapping there with these students. The guy sitting next to him was this rather eccentric fellow. His name was Tuvia, and I've told the story before, and people actually knew who this Tuvia was. He was a genius. He was proficient in 17 languages, including Yiddish. And so he was able to have a great conversation with Rabbi Bukit, who spoke mostly in Yiddish. And in this conversation, he asked Rabbi Bukit, where are you from? He says, I'm from Poland. Really? We're in Poland? He says, it's a little village, you never heard of it. So he says, try me, I've been around, I know some things. Okay, I'll tell you. The city was called Melnick. So Tuvia says, have I ever heard of Melnick? My grandparents are from Melnick. Not only are my grandparents from Melnick, but they belong to a group here in Los Angeles called the Melnick Society. Now understand 1970, pre-Google age, pre-computer internet age, survivors of the Holocaust, to do research on anything was not easy. You didn't have information at your fingertips. It was word of mouth. It was spreading of word of mouth. Yad Vashem comes along and tries to gather information, but still it wasn't computerized so that anyone could find information. So imagine this, 1970, Rabbi Bukit is hearing the words that there's a group here called the Melnick Society. And they begin to talk, and Rabbi Bukit tells Tuvia that he was an only child, and for years and years he's been trying to find some record, some trace of what happened to his parents. But he couldn't find any information. So if there's such a thing as the Melnick Society, maybe someone would know something. Maybe someone there knew my parents, knew my mother, knew my father. So Tuvia says, I'll speak to my grandparents and I'll try to find out some information for you. Shabbos was over. A few days go by. The phone rings in the Stillman's house. Mrs. Stillman, my name is Chana. I'm a member of a small group here called the Melnick Society. And I'm a close friend of Tuvia's grandparents. I need to meet with your father. I understand your father's here, and I'd like to get together with him. So they make up to meet Sunday at the Chabad house on Gailey in Westwood. And Rabbi Bukit was tense, obviously excited, but at the same time very tense. First time he's going to hear something from someone from Melnick. And he knew it wasn't going to be just a simple encounter. So he asked all of his children to join him and to go to the Chabad house for this encounter, but that they should dress in their Shabbat clothing, that they should treat this meeting with respect. They come to the Chabad house, the woman is waiting for them, a distinguished looking elderly woman. And the woman says to Rabbi Bukit, I knew your parents in Melnick very well. I was a very close friend of your mother's, of Rachel Bukit, Aleha Shalom. And I want to share with you, as painful as it is, what happened during those last days. And she tells him, as the Nazis come into Melnick, and the roundups, the murders, the deportations. She says, your mother, my daughter, and I were in a boxcar together. We were being transported to the Treblinka death camp. We stayed close to each other throughout the whole journey. While we were traveling, I looked up and I saw that there was this little window on the top, this tiny opening on the top of the car. And I noticed that every so often the train would slow down. So at one point I told your mother that the next time the train slows down like that, we should hoist ourselves up to that window, try to squeeze through, jump out, and make a run for it. If we don't survive, we don't survive, but we're not going to survive this anyway. Your mother said that she was too weak to even try. I won't be able to. And I'm going to slow you down, and we'll all be killed. The next time the train slowed down, I turned to your mother and I said, please, please come with me. Please, Rachel, please, let's go. Let's go now. And she said to me, Ich kann nicht. I can't. But you take your daughter and you go, and may God be with you. She continues telling Rabbi Bukit, I want you to know what happened next. Your mother took me. She turned me around face to face. She held my face close to hers. And she looked at me in the eye. And she said, but promise me this. If you do survive, and you ever meet my son, my Chaya Meir, I want you to give him a message from me. Tell him, as ich hab gemacht a Zecher, I left an imprint in this world. I left a memory in this world. Our lives were not for naught, and they'll never take away our memory, for our journey will go on. Tell my son, ich hab gemacht a Zecher, I left an imprint in this world. She told me these words, I'll never forget them. I grabbed my daughter, I hoisted her up through the window. We scrambled up out of the boxcar onto the roof of the train, and we jumped. A miracle of miracles, because it took dozens of miracles, we survived. Years in the DP camp, and then the journeys from there. In all my years since, I've wondered if you, Chaya Meir, were alive. I wondered if I would ever be able to meet my friend's son, if God would ever allow our paths to cross so that I can give you your mother's last message. And now I see you and your whole family, and she was so right. She left an imprint in this world. Her life was not for naught. Her journey was not for naught. Eila Maaseh B'nai Yisrael, these are the journeys of the children of Israel. We've had many journeys. Throughout our lives, our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents, they send us messages and they're telling us, make a zeicher in this world, make an imprint in this world. And every stop of your journey, accomplish something. You see, they're depending on us to carry the legacy of their souls forward, to carry on their journey. We are that zeicher, we are their memory in this world. And through us, they live on. And through us, their destiny is realized, because every part of the journey is connected to the next. They are invested in our lives and the choices we make and in the actions that we take. And they're praying for us, and they're guiding us, and they're encouraging us, and they're pleading with us to focus on the journey, to take advantage of each day, of each opportunity to create an everlasting imprint in this world. You see, spiritual journeys, they know no bounds. They transcend time and space. They are forever. So we can be years apart, centuries apart, and worlds apart. And yet we can still feel their presence in our midst. No, we don't understand God's ways, and we cannot begin to understand why our people have had to take the journeys that we have. But we do know that our ancestors have weathered those journeys with unbelievable faith, love, and devotion. And now us, we, this generation, our journey is the journey to rebuild. After all the devastation, after all the destruction of generations and centuries, we, this generation of freedom, you and me, we are the fortunate generation that our job is to sanctify God in the times of freedom and the times of plenty. Perhaps the most critical part of the journey. So let's do our job. Eila Maaseh B'nai Yisrael. Let's finish the job. Let's be the generation that brings it to the finish line, to Yerushalayim Habnuya, that brings of all the journeys to the ultimate journey, the journey to the promised land with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. May it happen speedily in our days. A good Shabbos, everybody.